Tony from her Homestead Skills. I'm just ready to go out the door as soon as Mark gets ready to take me out. I've convinced him to drive me around. We've had a nasty snowstorm overnight, and I'm just never comfortable driving in that, whereas he has no issue with it. So I do have to go out and pick up some things that I've ordered. And anyway, I hope that everyone that caught in the ice storms in the US are safe and secure. We're doing fine here. It's just cold and snowy, but that's normal for the North Country. Anyway, okay, what we're discussing today is canning shortages versus canning alternatives, and how many jars are enough. So to do that, you have to develop a food security plan to understand that and what alternatives to canning are available. Canning is certainly popular, but it is not the only method. So why consider alternatives? Well, obviously, supply considerations seem to be first and foremost on everybody's mind today. Canning jars still seem to be in short supply. I mean, I had no trouble finding them if I wanted them, but I'm not in the same position as everybody else. There are localities where they're still in short supply. I have found canning lids, and I have found a young lady who took 100 boxes of canning lids all at once. So there's definitely some hoarding going on, and it probably will continue because of past shortages. So if you can't find enough jars and you can't find enough lids, what do you do? I don't really think that that will decrease. I think that you're going to have more new canners this year. Had things gone back to normal, obviously things would be different, but they're not back to normal. So you have probably quite a number of new canners going to start up this year as well. And that will just enhance what's been going on. We can't rely on the manufacturers to guarantee stock. They may not be in a position where they can probably ascertain the need. They'll probably do their best, obviously. Selling as much product as they can is always in their best interests, but they can't always guarantee supply. So what can you do? Well, you can, for one, rotate and reuse your existing jars. And what I mean by that is, well, determine what foods that you want to can for the full year. Like I can tomatoes in the fall to last me the full year. Perhaps corn, I do that as well. There are other foods that you can quarterly or monthly. You don't have to do a whole batch for the whole year, so that you can rotate and reuse the empty jars. So that way you don't have to have full jars on the shelves for the full year. So another thing that you can do is have an alternative supply of commercially canned foods. If you can't get enough jars to do all your own canning, there's nothing wrong with buying some professionally canned products. And they should reflect your family's eating habits. You should never just stock up on canned food to have canned food in the house. You know, perhaps things like milk and tuna and salmon are, tuna and salmon are certainly things that I cannot can for various reasons. Don't have access to the meat, for one. Soups and stews, maybe, if your family likes some prepared soups and stews. I mean, soups and stews you can yourself, but if you don't have access to jars, that could be one thing that you may want to buy ready, prepared for you. Okay, so what else can we do to enhance food security? Well, if you can't can or you're canned everything that you can, you've purchased everything that you can from the stores, now you could look at other methods here. Okay, fermenting is another option for food storage. Typically I use the larger half-gallon to 1-gallon jugs in order to do my fermenting, and I typically ferment pickles and sauerkraut. Now they can be left in the larger containers, or they can be moved into smaller jars when they become available. But you don't need to ferment your products in a quart jar, although you can. I've always found that I've had better success doing it in the larger jars. Okay, freezing is another method of food storage, and one that we're all very familiar with. But some foods do actually retain their flavor better when frozen rather than canned. I've learned that from experience myself. Canning rutabagas lost the nice flavor that they have, but when I attempted to blanch and freeze them, they were perfect. They were beautiful. I love rutabagas. Some people call them turnips. They are in the turnip family, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, they're just the big purple turnipy looking thing, but they have a very interesting flavor, and canned, it's spoiled. So freezing is also another way to store food that you've had a big harvest of. Say you've had a big harvest of tomatoes and you don't have jars to can your tomatoes this year, or you're just a bit of short supply. Well, those tomatoes can be frozen, and then when your jars become available, you can can them then. That is another way to preserve your food that if you don't have, it's an alternative if you don't have canning jars available. Okay, another thing that anybody who wants to develop a very strong food storage security pantry should also look at dry storage of bulk foods, and things like getting a supply of Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, vacuum sealers, 5-gallon food grade buckets. All those things are alternatives to canning jars. And things like beans and rice can definitely be placed in dry storage for years, actually. And when you do that, you can, just can the supply of beans that you're going to use short term and leave the greater percentage of them in dry bulk. So white rice, actually, you can store for, I believe that it's good for 25 years if stored properly. So oatmeals, grains, dry milk are all can be all stored in alternative containers rather than necessarily in canning jars. Things like sugar and salt do not need to be canned. Sugar will become rock hard if you try to take any air out of a container with sugar in them. So it can be left just in a food grade container, but without oxygen absorbers, or not vacuum sealed. Do not vacuum seal sugar. Salt, I've always left it in its original container. I have no need to do anything different than that. A flour is one of those things that really does not keep for the longest time. I do keep my flour in a 5-gallon bucket, but then I buy the very large bag of flour. I do a fair amount of baking. I make a lot of pasta, and I bake a lot of bread. I bake all my own bread now, so I will go through that within a reasonable time frame. It's certainly not long-term storage, but it's not, I don't have to go out and buy flour every week. So, and if you're going to store things like rice and beans and oatmeal or things like that long-term, it's probably best to freeze them for a couple of days to get rid of things that you don't want in your food storage. Another thing to consider is fresh storage. Now, I currently don't have that ability. I don't have the facilities for fresh storage anymore. But if you do, you can also store fresh vegetables without processing them in any way at all. Think vegetables like winter squash and pumpkins can be left on shelves. Your onions and garlic that you've grown in your garden can be hung from mesh bags and stored that way, you know. Vegetables like potatoes and root crops and cabbages should be put in a container rather than exposed to air, but they can still be stored fresh. Carrots as well, but there is definitely a different method of storing carrots. You don't just leave them exposed to air either. So yes, prepare for your fall canning season. By all means, buy all the jars and lids that you think you need or you can find. But if there continues to be a shortage due to more new people becoming interested in the art of canning, or perhaps other people hoarding whatever supplies they come across, which is going to happen, or even the inability of manufacturers to keep up with the demand, have a plan B in place. Not all foods are best canned. Experiment with alternative food storage methods. There are a number of them, and some foods are best stored using other methods. So anyway, I hope that this video will provide you some food for thought. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll catch you on the next one. This is Tony from her Homestead Skills saying goodbye for now.